be consistent with who you're speaking to, what you're posting off, still show yourself and be a guest on other shows, especially if the show is like yours, because those listeners will also want more and more variety, and they'll come to you for that.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and today I'm joined with Jerry Dugan from Beyond the Rut. And Jerry's passionate about supporting business leaders, helping them with different things like work-life balance. So one of the questions that I'm going to ask, does work-life balance even exist? Because I'll tell you, it's very polarized. On one end, everybody's like, you have to balance, you have to balance. And then I read this other book that said, no, it's not balance, it's switch tasking. You go here all the way, then you go here all the way. And then there's other people that say you have to be out of balance for a certain amount of time. So I'm really curious just to start there. Jerry, Beyond the Rut supports people with a life worth living in faith, family, and career. So a lot of the listeners that you have are probably around my age and your age that are probably struggling with the work-life balance and making sure that they are putting enough to their faith and their family and their career. And I love that. I want to ask, why do you think work-life balance is real? And what have the other people said?
Yes. Ultimately, I think they're all saying the same thing. Like, if you really break down to what, like, even the folks that say there's no such thing as work-life balance, what they're ultimately saying is, like, we make life choices based on our priorities. And when I talk about work-life balance, I'm saying the same thing. Well, my hope is that when you're on your deathbed, I already know you're not going to say, man, I wish I did one more launch of my program, or man, I wish I was at inbox 0 more days of my life. You're going to say things more like, I wish I had one more day to spend with my grandkids or my great-grandchildren. I would have loved to have been there for my daughter's wedding or for my son's wedding, whatever it is. And in serving in combat and knowing some folks who worked in hospice care, that is the thing that they hear over and over again, that people wish they had more time to be with the people they love. And on the flip side, when they have the people they love, they wish they succeeded more in their career. And so it's like, what if you could win at all of that? What if you could take your career as far as you can and not sacrifice your family at the same time? And so you look at what's important to you and how are your current activities impacting those areas of your life? How are you doing with your family life? You know, okay, work's taking a lot out of me. Okay, is that a permanent thing or is this a temporary thing? If it's temporary, then you talk it over with your partner and you decide from there, like, okay, yeah, this is temporary. What's the deadline? What does success look like? And what's the bailout trigger that says, all right, we're not hitting these measures. Doesn't look like we will. Let's scrap that and go another direction. So that, to me, that is why I'm a big fan of work-life balance. It's not just strictly, I spend so many hours at work, so many hours at home. It really is, how is getting out early impacting all the things? Am I going to miss my children's big school event? What's that impact if I do? And what's the message I send? Because I'll tell you from personal experience, I was a lot of kids' superheroes because I would volunteer my kids' school for a day and their dad had to go to work. And it's not to say anything against their dad, because why did the dad go to work? Because he wanted to provide for his family. And so the motivation for a good thing for the family was there, but there wasn't that balance to, I also want to communicate to my child that my child is important. I want to communicate to my partner that she's important. And so it's, how do you win at all those things? And how do you find the right company that will support you as a person while also supporting you in your career growth and getting you to perform well to help the company also succeed? It's like, there's a way to find all that.
I want to hear a tip or two.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, you and I talked a little bit about this before we press record. You were talking about the checkbox.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, we got a checklist and we're knocking off these boxes, and it seems like we're checking off all the boxes. It feels like when we look at the checklist, it's pretty much full.
Yeah.
But we might not feel fulfilled, even at the expense of checking off lots of boxes. So if that's us, so we're listening and we're trying to think of what is it that we think we've had success on paper, but we don't really feel it. We don't really feel like we're everywhere we need to do. What's one or two tips for the listener to be able to feel like they're doing the right thing right now?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is you got to know who you are. And that's the big, broad umbrella piece of advice. Know who you are. What is valuable to you? Like, what do you believe in? What do you not believe in? It's, if you believe in respecting the dignity of every person, then that is key. If you value time with family, then your calendar should reflect that. If you value being a supportive person for your family, does that go beyond just monetary support? And so knowing your values, I think, is very huge. What is your vision, your purpose in life? I have a couple of mottos I live by. One is the Dugan crest motto. So somebody around the 1500s, and it's a miracle that the Dugans are still around, because apparently these guys called the Saxons came into like Ireland and almost wiped us all out. But like good Irish people, we stuck around. And so that's not important. The important thing is somebody added to the family crest. Oh man, it's by virtue and valor. So virtute et valore. And it sounds cooler when it's Latin. I hope I said it right. So that's one thing I live by is, am I living my life according to my family's crest motto? Am I living by virtue? Am I living by valor? Being courageous to do what's right when even nobody's looking. But then from there, I had a vision that I wanted my children to live a life that was better than mine, but also be set up to be better adults than I was, to have better successes than I did, to know who they are, and to feel comfortable pursuing their own dreams. Like, that's in a written vision that I have tucked away on Evernote somewhere. So you got to have something like that. Like, what do you stand for? What is life like for you when you die? And I love talking about these things called the 5 F's: your faith, your family, your fitness, your finances, and your own future growth or possibilities. Like, looking at your life through those lenses, what does success look like for you? So I guess that's the second one, is defining.
Wait a second, Jerry. I missed an F. F that. I got faith. I got family. I got finances. I got fitness. And what did I miss? Family, faith, finances, and fitness.
Future possibilities.
Future possibilities.
Yeah. So you're always growing to be better today than you were yesterday. And then what's that future state of yourself you'd like to become? And so being a constant learner is that future possibilities one. Reading books that are outside your usual norm, listening to podcasts that are outside your norm, being open to ideas that are not typically in your bucket or wheelhouse. Either A, to see how your own ideas and beliefs stack up, because sometimes, like I myself have gone through life and realized, oh wow, I held on to this belief and I met 3 people who completely challenged that. Is my belief wrong, or is it just not as strong as I thought it was? Is there more context I needed to add? And so sometimes I realized I was completely wrong about something. And other times I realized, oh, I was missing a lot of context here. I believe this, but only in this context, because I also believe this, and my belief should not undermine somebody else's right to be who they are. And so it's like, oh yeah, I can wrap my head around that, and I could be a decent person in my community that way. So that, yeah, the future possibility is that a bit more unpacked. I should have put that in the book.
Have you ever heard of, I think it's Gino Wickman, and I hope I'm not wrong. And he wrote like 3 books. One was like, I'm going to just type in Gino Wickman. This is going to be the easy way. Then I'll sound so smart instead of dumb. Gino Wickman. All right. So he wrote 3 books. Yes. What the heck is EOS? He wrote Traction, and he wrote what? It's not showing me the last one. Traction. What the heck is EOS? And there's another one called Rocket Fuel. Okay. So these 3 books are interesting, and it kind of is what you're talking about, but in more of a business category. And so I think this is really great to extract it and bring us to the listener. In Rocket Fuel, What the Heck is EOS, and Traction, ultimately what Gino Wickman talks about is your business should have a culture or have values that you all live by. And so it's interesting because when we look at all of the things that we can value, let's just pretend, and I don't know the number, I'm just going to say that it's 20 values. There's 20 things that are good, and most people would agree with 18 or 19 of them. So one would be honesty, but at what expense? Are we going to be rude and honest? Another one might be politeness. Another one might be doing the right thing even when it hurts. You kind of mentioned your integrity. Even when people are not looking, am I going to be doing this with my family crest and everything? So the Gino Wickman also talks about like all of these things that we can value, and most of them are important to everyone. Honesty, of course, that sounds right, but not everybody puts that at the top of their value. Maybe they put discretion. Maybe they put kindness above it, or maybe they put honesty above kindness, and et cetera, et cetera. They might put doing the right thing, even when it hurts, as one of the top values. And so in Rocket Fuel and EOS and Traction, Gino talks about how we need to build our team, our company culture around where all of us agree on these main values. Like, we value making money. We value serving the client. We value X, Y, or Z. All of them are good, but which one is in the hierarchy? And so when I'm hearing you basically gave me two things. The first one is you got to know who you are. You got to know your culture. You got to know your values. What do you believe in? And you talked about by virtue and valor. What do you believe in? What matters to you? And then you focus on it and you bring people along. And the second one is a written vision. Like, you actually write down the vision where you put in faith, family, finances, fitness, and future possibilities. And you figure out, how are you doing these? How does this work for you? And you write it down, because everybody's vision, like a fingerprint, has to be different. Everybody's culture or their values have to be a little bit different, how they put them. And for you, you're saying a way that you can check off the boxes is to just know exactly what the heck the boxes are in the first place, know which things matter to you, and get rid of the rest so you can really focus on those. And I thought that was really interesting, because not only can we do it in our business, we can do it on our podcast. And as you've illustrated, we can do it with our family, with our own lives, our personal lives. So I thought that was really, really beautiful. I appreciate you going into that. Before we move on to anything, something that I missed or something else you want to share about being able to check off those boxes and feel really good about it, even that person who might be listening might feel like it looks like they're checked off, but they don't feel completely fulfilled.
Yeah. Similarly to how business, they have their strategic plan that pushes them and they make big decisions off of that. Does this activity support the strategic initiative of this organization? And if the answer is yes, they keep pushing forward with some adjustments. If it doesn't, they're like, well, then why are we doing that? Let's cut that out and let's restructure and reorganize. And it's cool to see that there are these business and even podcasting principles and practices that help us create a better podcast, create a better business. And we don't realize how easily we can just transfer those same skill sets into our very lives. And so it's the same thing. You know, how many people do we know who are physicians who hate being a physician? I can think of 2 or 3. Or somebody became a lawyer because the money was good and they quit being a lawyer because they realized that wasn't fulfilling for them. Or me, I left my corporate job because I realized I didn't want to start all over again and build something that belonged to somebody else. And it was time to go after my dreams. So even my mom kept encouraging me to become a doctor. I was a pre-med student. I'm not a doctor now because I did not do well as a pre-med student. But I realized later on, it's because that was never my dream. That was my mom's dream. She wanted me to be a doctor. She wanted to be able to live vicariously through me and what she wanted success to be. And once I realized, oh, gosh, I don't want to be a doctor. What do I want to be? Of course, now that took a 10-year journey for me to realize what I did want to be. But I got there, man. That's important. So anyway, that was it. Yeah, willing to walk away from something.
Really good stuff. I want to move into just your podcast journey. Now, for the listener, I'll point out a couple of things that I'm seeing with your podcast. I think, haven't you been doing it for 8 years?
Yeah, this particular show, yeah. 8 years, yeah.
Amazing. So with 8 years, over 400 episodes, and a lot of traction, not going back to Gino Wickman, a lot of traction on your podcast success. I think that we've got a couple of listeners that haven't quite been doing it for 8 years. They may have been doing it for a year or 2. They're new and they would like to have the type of success that you've got with your podcast. So I would like to get a couple of takeaways, what you've done, what you've learned, what you would do differently. First, a quick word from our sponsor, but when we get back, I really want you to focus on what made your podcast successful so that the listeners' podcast can also be successful. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Jerry Dugan, and we've talked a little bit about work-life balance, helping leaders with work-life balance, making sure that you're checking all the boxes and feeling fulfilled, and the 5 Fs and his family crest, which I don't even remember what it said in Latin. I think it was Latin, but it really means by virtue and valor. And I wanted to talk about now, how is his podcast so frickin' well known, and he's doing a great job. He's getting a lot of success through the podcast. And hopefully you'll be able to take away a couple of things that can support you in a successful podcast as well. Jerry, what do you think made your podcast?
Yeah. A lot of what I'm seeing really is in the last year and a half, really. So I jokingly tell folks, but I'm not joking, that it seems like I did year 1 7 times, and then finally I had year 8 happen all at once. So it's no overnight success kind of thing. I think the first thing that really helped was when there was a team of 3 of us. So we started off with 3 of us. We all agreed on one thing other than the name of the show, and that was the avatar of the show. So we have an avatar that we named AJ. He's 35 years old, married to his college sweetheart. He has 2 kids that they both have together. One's in elementary school, one's in middle school. AJ has a mid-level leadership career going on with a corporation in a metro area, and got the car, got the house, got the 6-figure income, but feels stuck in life. And so from there, we start to unravel how AJ feels stuck. There's the commute to work. There's the no real future in the job he's in, not really making any progress, wants to be a good family man when he gets home, but he's just drained of energy. And this cycle is putting a strain on his marriage. The kids feel like he doesn't love him, which is so far from the truth. So how does AJ live the life that he really wanted to live in his faith, in his family, in his fitness, finances, and his future? And so that's what we did when we came together to start the show. Now, where we had a lot of weak spots, and I feel we did the first 7 years over and over again, was that when you listen to the early episodes, we were all over the place. We didn't really stick to that mantra, like, what does AJ really need? And I hate to say it, but it wasn't until like the other 2 guys quit from the show that I realized, oh, we're so far from what we wanted to do and who we wanted to help. And so how do I get there? And so year 6, really going into year 7, was, how do I niche this down? I worked with a couple of different groups that really helped me start to niche that down. Jerry, you're helping specifically this demographic. You're helping them specifically with things like work-life balance and really having a mapped out future or a vision for their future. Focus on that. Okay, what kind of guest should I have? And so this kind of leads into the second one, which was that paring down, that niching down. So the first one was having that vision of who I wanted to help. The second one was really paring down and niching down. How am I going to help the AJ? And once I started to see that, a bunch of doors opened up. And the third thing was I needed to get the word out there. So the marketing piece. I threw stuff out there for the first 7 years, but really it's in this last year that I've been more intentional about it. You know, the posts that I put out there on social media are aimed at AJ. The shows I appear on are aimed at AJ. And it's that guest appearance on other shows. I think so far in the last 10 months, I've been on almost 70 other podcasts, and to the point where now I'm starting to feel like I'm in alternate realities now. Like, how do I know Adam Adams? Oh yeah, I was on his show. All right, there we go. We talked about this, and this. Or how do I know Deirdre? Oh yeah, I'm here, and here. It's just all that's starting to overlap. But anyway, those would be the big 3: is know who you're serving. The second thing is truly niche down. Even if you have a lot of passions, interests, try to stick to one thing and just kind of let little doses of yourself sprinkle into your episodes. That way people know what they're getting when they come to your show. And then the third thing, I know I just said it.
Marketing.
Marketing, yes. So be consistent with who you're speaking to, what you're posting off. Still show yourself and be a guest on other shows, especially if the show is like yours, because those listeners will also want more and more variety, and they'll come to you for that.
All right. These are good. These are really, really good. All right. So if you're listening and you're thinking, you know what, I want to have a podcast and I want to do the first year over and over and over 7 times, and then finally hit my success. Perfect. Do exactly what Jerry did do. If you're listening and you don't want to do the 7 years over and over and over, then here's the 3 things that Jerry's talking about. The first thing is to understand your avatar. It's the vision of the podcast. The second one is to really niche down. And the third is to do marketing. And so let's talk about these 3 things a little bit. First and foremost, with the avatar, Jerry, his name's AJ. You know how old he is. You mentioned how many kids he has. You mentioned where he lives and how he lives. You mentioned what he's worried about, what keeps him up at night, what he's thinking, what he's struggling with, what's making him unhappy, and what he really wants to accomplish. And so what I think that the listener needs to take away from how you've really, your first step, knowing that avatar and having a vision of the show, is like for us to focus on all of the parts of that avatar. You mentioned that after 7 years, you realized you were far from what you wanted to do because you had written down AJ, but you weren't thinking about AJ at every step of the way. So I want to have you share with us why the psychographics, the things that holds him back, the things that he's worried about, the things that he's struggling with. Why not only think about, oh, he wants to do this and he's going through this, but really focusing so much on the psychographics, which, if I remember correctly, as you were talking about him, you mentioned probably a half a dozen things that are anxiety in AJ's heart. Why is that so important?
A lot of it is because, I mean, there's so much out there that we could talk about. And again, those, as far as topics go, onto a podcast. And for the first 5 years of the show, that's exactly that. Like, we talked with a marathon runner because she just happened to pass the host of the show at the time, Brandon, in a triathlon. So he's like, wow, she amazed me. I want to know her story. And we wound up talking to this lady about marathon running, which is cool, except AJ is not a marathon runner. AJ hates running. AJ doesn't think running will solve his issues in any way, shape, or form. When I got into the psychographics of AJ and honed it even deeper, it was like AJ really wants to hear from two types of people. Business leaders who also found balance in their lives, so they're successful in their career and they can say, I feel like I've got balance at home and that I've got the right perspective on my career in relation to my life. AJ needs hearing from more of those types of people. And on occasion, maybe not so much a pastor, because AJ is also Christian. I kind of left that part out when I described him earlier. He doesn't really want to hear from pastors thumping him over the head with the Bible, but he wants to hear from people who've also applied Christian principles in a positive way that lifted him up and helped him be a better husband, helped him be a better father, a more engaged person in the home. So how does that all come together? AJ doesn't really care about the politics that are going on right now. Anyway, not to get into all that. And so getting into the psychographics helped me to get into that. Plus, AJ's a father of a young child and a middle school child. So what are the struggles that come in with that? Your middle schooler is going to be much more cut off and short answers. Like, this person used to be engaged and your best buddy is now answering you with grunts and shrugs and one-word answers. So how do you navigate that? And so when I do my episodes now, I'm thinking of AJ and I'm thinking of, well, how do you break through to that child who was used to speak to you in sentences, now gives you grunts, or used to have you volunteer in school and now they don't want you around. So how are you present for that person? And a big focus that AJ has tends to be around his own career. So how do I help you alleviate your stress from work so that you can enjoy life at home? So
let's move to the niching, because I know that I've got a listener or two that is thinking right now, the listener's like, all right, I can't get too niched. I can't narrow down what I talk about too small, because then I'm leaving out a lot of people. Then I'm leaving out a ton of people that might have wanted to listen, but like I'm cutting them all out. So I think it honestly works backwards from like the smaller you go, the better your success. So I want to hear it from you, like, why niche down, and why was that the second thing? Why was that so important for you to niche down? Because I've got a listener who's like afraid to do it because they probably believe that if I do this, I'm cutting out a large part of the people that might want to listen to me. And so I'm going after 5 people instead of 100 million people. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Oh, man. Now it's second on my list because it was the second thing I realized I needed to work on. I'm like, oh, yeah. The idea of niching down does feel like, oh, man, I'm going to pare this down so much that nobody listens. But once I wrapped my head around the idea that the fact that there are over 7 billion people on this planet, that a lot of them are on the internet and most of them speak English, I realized that gives me probably 4 billion people to work with. I think that if I niche down, I'm still going to reach a good number of those folks. In the US alone, I think I forgot what the number was, like 100 million people are listening to podcasts, give or take a few million. So even in the US, if I had just a fraction of that, that would be amazing. So niching down did two things for me. One, it helped me focus on who comes onto the show, what do I talk about? And I guess the payoff for that was in the last 12 months, I saw, now I'm not like a huge show, I don't think, but I saw a almost doubling of my total downloads for an episode. I saw an uptick in my first 30 days downloads for an episode. And then when I go into the demographics of my show, you would think that a guy focusing on Christian men who are married with children, they're in the 35 to 45-year-old range, that would be my audience. My audience is 55% women. And some of them are divorced single mothers. And so even though I niched down for a specific target audience, the reach has actually gotten bigger, and the interactions on social media are now much more engaging. Like it's more than just my mom and my wife responding and liking my posts. Like business people are coming forward and having conversations with me. Business women are coming forward and having conversations with me. I'm being asked to speak at places now, like for money. And it's like, wow, all because I niched down and got specific. Like the niching down also helps me be passionate, even more passionate. So like me talking with a business leader who faced a burnout to the point where his left arm was paralyzed and they had to like quit a bunch of things to kind of get his health back and get his family back. I'm much more passionate about that guy than the marathon runner or the people who opened up a keto bakery. Actually, those goodies were good. So please don't be mad if you're hearing this. It was so yummy that you brought those treats into the studio. Okay, I'm back. So all that to say, niching down helped me be focused, helped me easily find the guests I need. I keep saying clients. And then my passion just comes out a lot more easily because of that.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you about the clients. You say clients and sometimes you say guest. And sometimes you say listener. And in a moment, I want to talk about that. But I got to point out when you're saying niching down, I'm basically hearing that 5 to 6 years, you went less niched. 1 to 2 years, you went more niched. You wondered if by niching down, if you'd get fewer downloads, but you say you got double the downloads ever since you made that change. And I got a couple like little quotes. Reach has actually gotten bigger. More than just my mom and wife, all because I niched down. Reach has gotten bigger, more than just my mom and wife, and all because I niched down. So 5 to 6 years of putting out great content, but being less niched didn't give you anywhere near the results of the last year or two when you got your audience even smaller and your focus even smaller, and somehow you doubled your downloads. Pretty interesting. We will talk about the marketing piece here in just a second, which is the third main thing. The first was the avatar/vision. The second was the niching down. The third is marketing, the marketing piece being more intentional. So I want to ask you some questions on that. However, you said something a couple of times. You were kind of interchangeable on the guest, on the listener, and on the client. And so I'm curious, does your podcast, is it part of a business? For example, the top of a funnel? And if so, how does that work? And then we'll get into the marketing piece after.
In a very broad stroke, sort of.
Okay.
So when I left my corporate job almost a year ago, I took all those skills in doing nearly a decade and a half of leadership development training, leadership development coaching and consulting in the corporate environment, and started my own business doing that for people. And I just more recently accepted the fact that I should open myself up to provide a mastermind of some kind. So it's not one-on-one coaching or consulting, but in a group using social constructivist learning theory, collaborative learning theory to build off of each other using the structure that I've used for almost 2 decades. And so AJ, in a sense, is the target audience for that business. Does that mean I only serve Christian men 35 to 45? No. it's
love that. I love that. That's important. And forgive me for cutting you off. That's important because like I had a perfect avatar when I did real estate. Okay. It's Siva Venugopalan. It's a real person, a real human. Siva was a certain age, a certain ethnicity, a certain job title. He had a certain amount of kids. He struggled with certain things. He had a certain amount of money in the bank. And so it didn't mean that I was sexist because my avatar was a man. It doesn't mean that. It didn't mean that I was racist because my guy was Indian and not black or white or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. It didn't mean that I would push people out. In fact, we had a lot of people that were not 42 years old that invested with us. That we had 18, 20, 25, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50, 60, 70, and 80 years old. And there was men and there was women. It didn't mean that I wouldn't serve anyone else. It's just that when I niched down and I knew who I was serving, that engineer doesn't mean I wouldn't work with a doctor. I wouldn't work with a lawyer, as you mentioned before, doctors and lawyers. But my perfect person was an engineer. It was easy for me to talk to them. And so I did my content for that person. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing with AJ. You understand that you have women that you can also serve. You understand that you also have somebody who's older than 45 or younger than 35. Maybe they're not all Christian. And you're still able to serve them. They still want to work with you. You're not pushing out anyone. It's just when you understand a person and understand everything that they're going through, it's easier to relate to them. Super interesting. I cut you off.
Oh, no, it's fine.
And I apologize. And I hope you can get back to where you were.
Yeah. What I was going to mention was, so the business side of things takes AJ's needs and goes deeper. So I mentioned earlier that AJ's need is that he's so overwhelmed at work that he doesn't have enough energy to bring back home. And when you look at the corporate environment today, we had the Great Resignation in 2021. We had the even worse year in 2022. And even though it looks like turnover is starting to drop here in 2023, the disengagement has gone up. So these leaders are kind of stuck with, gosh, I got a whole workforce where like 60% of them possibly have burned out and just quietly quit on me. And I myself am done. And so I've been helping leaders with a framework I developed over the past few months called TENT. And it's like, if you put these 4 stakes in the ground in your leadership career, your leadership tent actually pops up pretty easily. You have the adaptability to meet the needs of your team, and you create this environment where people feel cared for and they see their growth opportunities right there in front of them because you're leveraging what's in front of you, almost Mr. Miyagi style, to give people that growth they need in their career for their skills, their competencies, and so on. And so now that you're building this environment at work, you feel better about your day. You can tell everybody, hey, go home, great job today, and then you're going home as well. So it's an external thing to really address what I want to help people achieve, which is that overall life success, defining success for themselves, creating that vision. But to get there, they've got to have a quick win, and it's right there in the workplace. So if I can help leaders fix what's going on at work, create that environment that they've always dreamt of having, they can now look inward and say, okay, now that I got that settled, what about the rest of my life? What do I want to do from here? What do I really want to accomplish? And then now that they have that, that'll further fuel them into going back into work and creating an even more collaborative, empowering environment. Because the more that their team can do and take off of that leader's plate, the more that leader can take off for vacation, guilt-free. They can go home early. They can go to their child's soccer game, whatever it is. So the business ultimately is helping people. The niched part is I'm helping leaders boost employee engagement and stem their turnover tide with this framework called TENT. But ultimately, my hope, this is the tie back into the show, is I'm ultimately helping these leaders create a life worth living in their faith, family, and career. But we're just addressing the career spot first.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then I get to write off the podcast as a business expense.
Perfect. Perfect. So let's jump to the marketing. So again, after 5-6 years, you made some changes. You got very clear on the avatar and making sure you're serving them. Niche down so that you were making sure that you knew everything about them. And then the marketing piece. And I'm listening to you say the marketing piece, which I absolutely agree with. That's why my company, we do marketing for podcasters. However, I hear so many people that think that they don't need to do marketing, or they don't do any paid marketing or even organic marketing, like on social media, being intentional, as you have done. They don't, because they don't think that it's a good use of their time. And here's the thing that I think I see. Most of the people, like I'm talking about 95% of the people that don't do any marketing, they have a really poor producing podcast. And you started marketing and doubled your listeners. And I want to understand, what did you do for marketing? Because we've got the listener thinking like, all right, I'm bought in. I need to do some type of marketing. So let them know what is working.
Yeah. There are 3 time eras, I guess you can say. So like in our notes here, the first 5 to 6 years, really the first 6 years, I wasn't the one in charge of the marketing. And it's not just me to blame the other guy who's not on the show anymore. He really was in charge of the marketing. And this was our plan. We released one episode a week. It was on a Monday. And you would see one post on Twitter that says, new episode out today, and the link, and maybe a picture. And if I didn't have the graphics done in time, no post at all. Might see one post on our Facebook page. We had an Instagram, but we posted hardly ever to it. And that was that. That was our marketing for 6 years. So we posted and we ghosted, and we just figured people will find us. They'll search for us on Apple Podcasts. They'll search for us on when Spotify came out. They'll search on us on the interwebs because we're older guys, so we would say stupid stuff like that. And the reality was, like, 5 years, 6 years go by, and we're talking to people in our church, friends, family. We're talking about 6 years into this thing, and I kid you not, people we talked on a regular basis would, in conversation, say, wait, Jerry, you got a podcast? I'm like, what do you think I've been talking about for the last 6 years? Why do you think I disappear into a closet? And why do I hang out with this guy Brandon at a church in a room with a fort blanket? And it's like, we're podcasting. Why do we have a shirt that said Beyond the Rut? We had shirts made, but we only had one each. So one for him, one for me. And that was it. We didn't produce any other merch beyond that. So that was the first 6 years. Yeah. And like, other than my mom and my wife and my kids, a lot of folks had no idea that I actually had a podcast. And then Brandon left the show. And for 2 years, I just plastered social media. I realized, okay, we got to do more than once a week. So I did the opposite, the more annoying thing. It was pretty much spamming your feed with like 2 to 3 posts a day related to episodes for that week and past episodes. And I realized I was getting next to no engagement over that. But it wasn't until this past year, so for the last 12 months, that I really got focused with it. And I just recently learned something called a 4-post structure that Katie Brinkley does. So I don't know if you know Katie or not, but when I learned that from her, it just blew my mind. I'm like, wow, that gives me variety. I don't have to think too hard about it. And really what I'm doing on the internet isn't just, hey, go listen to my show. It was really in the last 12 months I realized it's about building a sense of community around this brand. And so it's engaging with other people. It's talking with them about, hey, that's awesome. That's a very beyond the rut type of thing you're doing. Just recently, a friend of mine up and moved his family to Spain because that's been a lifelong dream of his. And I just realized it like clicked. I'm like, wait, you're waiting for furniture to come into an apartment. That's not something you do if you're just staying there for a couple of weeks. Did you move to Barcelona? He's like, yeah, I did. And he's like, yeah, not really a rut story. I'm like, no, that's a beyond the rut story. You're living beyond that. And he goes, yeah, I am. And I'm like, keep it up. So anyway, it's like that type of engagement is also like, we slipped in using the name of my show as the pun or the dad joke of the conversation. So my social media posts had become more about getting interest. So like there's an awareness post, like, hey, here's a quote or here's a poll. Another post would be some tips, like either on a carousel, some images, just like 3 tips to help you address your limiting beliefs or challenge your limiting beliefs. The third post might be just something more community building, like, hey, something about me you wouldn't know just by looking at me. Did you know that when I was 11, this happened to me? And my extended family said this about me and I'd never amount to anything. But you fast forward, here I am. And all this is to tell you, it's not what other people tell you, it's what you tell you. And so that's a community building post. And then finally, like in the Gary Vaynerchuk jab, right hook fashion, I'll do what's called an action post. And again, I learned this from Katie Brinkley. And that's where I say, hey, I've been talking all week about this particular topic. If you want more or a checklist or a resource, put this comment in the comments and then I'll talk to you through direct message. And so then I get that engagement. And now I'm adding people to my email list and I'm seeing that start to grow. And so that's just on the social media platform. And I focused on one. So for me, I focused on LinkedIn, and then everything else is just sort of variations of what I focused on for LinkedIn. So niching down on the platforms that I play with helped a lot. I try to be everything on everything and realized I don't have the time for that. So if I were to only choose one, what would that one be? And for me, it was LinkedIn for my demographic. And then the rest I'm there, but it's really, again, just to let you know I'm alive and guide you to either LinkedIn or to the website or to the email address. So that's one facet of the targeted marketing. The other one was to be a guest on other shows. So I just started reaching out to shows that were similar to mine, that were reaching out to help men live their best lives. And so I focused on that. But then as I started my business, I also reached out to leadership podcasts. And once I published a book based on the show's message, I really got to niche down and hone in on what do I pitch to these shows? And so that book gave me a framework to pitch to folks like, hey, I want to help your people live unstuck in their lives by looking at their lives through the frame of the 5F, like through the lens of the 5Fs. There we go. I'm butchering it. Or to get unstuck from a rut by knowing their rut, R-U-T, so as an acronym, to get out of and live beyond the rut. So it was like, now I had a framework to play with because I wrote a book based off the show. I had a vision that around the marketing piece, which is on social media, I'm building this sense of connection with people and getting them to subscribe to the email list, which will then remind them that I've got a show out there. So that helped boost listenerships. It's really like an ecosystem. Like, it's not just about, hey, listen to my show. It's how can I support you? Here are the different media platforms I use to do that.
I got to quote you on that. It's not just, hey, listen to my show. You're actually trying to support them for what they need. And I like that because a lot of the people that do make posts, they go back to basically what the person that was working with you before would do. So we're talking, I think it was Twitter that you mentioned, and it would basically just be new episode, here's a link. It's kind of like self-serving. New episode, here's a link. It's listen to my show. Really, it's what it means is, hey, listen to my show. And you've changed it to be more about the other person. And you've got some really good information here to marketing. And there's basically two focuses that have supported you to get to where you are and double your listeners. And one of them is what you do on social so that it's not just your mom and your family that knows about it. You mentioned you went to church and people are like, hey, you've got a podcast? I didn't know. And you focus on utilizing Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V's jab, jab, right hook idea, where you do a couple small things and then there's more of a call to action. Another thing that I love is when you're talking about, like with the 4-post structure with Katie Brinkley that brought up, you're talking about engaging with other people, like having a community, having actually conversating instead of just like basically self-promoting. It's more like connection. And I thought that was really important. And one of my favorite things that you mentioned about the social media part is the call to action, where on social media and you're making a post, you ask the person who's watching or listening, reading, your follower, you're actually asking them to engage on the post. And that triggers algorithms in LinkedIn and Facebook and others. It triggers algorithms where they're saying, all right, this post gets engagement. And if we do more engagement, that means that more people are going to look at this post. And social media, we're talking LinkedIn, Facebook, and others, think to themselves, I've got a fiduciary responsibility to my investors and my owners to make us money. And so if there's a post that gets engagement, we're going to have an algorithm that pushes in front of more people. And so you just asking people to comment, that alone gets more people to even see it because people start commenting. And additionally, you have some social proofing, whereas you've got a couple of people already commenting and the other person is thinking, well, I don't want to miss out. It seems like other people are interested in it. And so I should be interested in it too. They might not even know completely why, but hey, other people want this. I should probably want it too. And so they're more likely to go and comment, and is like an upward spiral, just growing and growing and growing. I really love that. So the first part was your social media strategy and how you tried to be everything to everyone at first, and then you kind of honed it in. And the second one that I really like is you're getting on other people's shows with intention, being marketing intentionally. And so you're getting in front of men who want to live their best lives, leadership podcasts. And then you figure, hey, what do I want to pitch? And for you, you have got your book. You've got your book. It's about Beyond the Rut. And you talk about your 5 Fs and everything else. And that is clear reason for somebody to take action. It's not just, hey, listen to the show, but it's here's a piece of value that you need. So I've got the link to your audiobook, beyondtherut.com/audiobook. And we'll make sure that beyondtherut.com/audiobook is in the show notes today. The link to your website will be in the show notes. And the link to your podcast, Beyond the Rut, is also in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to connect with Jerry, if you feel like you're his perfect avatar, that you're the type of person that could get value by listening to the podcast or even joining the mastermind, those links to the book, to the podcast, to the website, and maybe even some of his social media is already in the show notes. So go ahead and scroll down and connect with him. And I will also remind you that just like Jerry, he didn't say this while we were recording, but he records every other episode is an interview, and the opposite is solo. And so on Mondays, I think it comes out as an interview episode. And on Thursday for him comes out a solo episode. I do the same thing. And I prepared a whole bunch of really good things that I know that you need to know right now. And so the next episode is one of those solo episodes. It's going to be short. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you there.
If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of three things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.